Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Keegan. And I'm just here to introduce, Matt and Chris from Wyndham Regional Foundation. I had, after, Craig Ruggles had come in and really, and he had some big, long conversation about Act 250 and 181 and realized that there was a lot of missing information or misinformation or concerns that, people were worried about or wanting to know more about. So these guys are here to present, and Alex is online as well, and people are watching from home. So thank you all for coming. I'm not staying, but appreciate you guys coming, and thank you guys for doing this for us. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm turning this on?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can we introduce us? And, okay. So I'm Chris Camp, the Executive Director of the Wyndham Regional Commission. We are a subdivision of state, political subdivision of the state of Vermont. We're a public agency. We serve 27 towns in southeast Vermont, all 23 towns, Wyndham County, Reedsburg, Cedarsburg, and Windhall, and Bennington County, and Westland and Winder County. We've been in existence since 1965. Our mission is to support towns in providing effective local governments and work with them on, collaboratively on regional issues. We do lots of different things with towns. Morgan can tell you we probably work with you on transportation projects, hazard mitigation projects, support town planning. We're currently working with you guys on your septic pumping ordinance. We'll work with them, local hazard mitigation plans, flood hazard bylaws, all kinds of stuff like that. But one of the things that we do is we are required by statute to adopt a regional plan. We're governed by the same requirements that town plans are, effectively, as far as like what land use categories you have to include in your town plan, what policies we're to include. And like towns, when it comes to Act 250, we're advisory. We don't issue permits. We can't say, we don't have any control over what the ultimate disposition of a project is when it goes through Act 250, which is the state land use regulatory rubric, or Section 248, which is the state energy and energy transmission rubric. So we, like a town, when we're participating in an Act 250 proceeding, we represent what our town policies are, the justification for those policies, but ultimately it's the district environmental commissions that would make the decision about what gets approved and what doesn't. We're same thing with the Public Utility Commission, this is Section 248. You don't have zoning here, but for towns that do, towns do actually have the option right of translating the policies and their plans into their own zoning bylaws. And Grafton doesn't have zoning. Okay. So you do have that opportunity if it's something you ever want to pursue. But one other thing I just want to mention before we get into this tonight is in a previous gig here, I used to work on federal farm agriculture policy. And my job, a lot of what I did was help work with farmers and farm organizations understand how to reply, how to engage with, how to be effective in rulemaking. And that's really what we're talking about now, which is this tier 3 rulemaking. And so just what I would advise is as we're talking to you and engaging with you, and as Alex is engaging with you, and I can talk about these guys in just a minute. When you think about it, if there are aspects of the law that require the rulemaking that you like or dislike, that is really, and you want to communicate that, that's really a matter for your legislators. When we get into the rulemaking, that's the matter for the Land Use Review Board. So what they're doing is they're doing what statute has directed them to do. And to be most effective, as you hear this presentation, when we have this discussion, and you think about what you like or don't like, what Alex really needs to hear from you guys is what aspects of the rule do you like, do you not like, what would work better, what would not work better, what concerns do you have, what opportunities do you think for this, whatever your position is, really kind of think to how can, what are aspects of this that I like that should be reinforce, or you really hope they keep, or what are things I think they should change, or otherwise edit, so think about it in those terms as opposed to, I mean, feel free to say whatever you want, you can say whatever you want, but if it's as simple as I like this or don't like this, it's not going to have much effect. But this is an opportunity for Alex. He's actively doing this. This is his job. Really looking for feedback from you guys. But how you think is going to affect you in graphic. So, so I've introduced Lonnie. You guys introduce yourself, and we'll go into the presentation. So,
I'll slide this over. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Bachler. I also work in the Regional Commission. Tonight, I'm mostly going to be going over Act 21, that piece of legislation and the changes included in that, and just to provide you with some information about what Windham Regional Commission is doing as it relates to our requirements under Act 91. So there are some requirements in that legislation for updates we need to make to our regional plan, as Chris mentioned. We have had a regional plan in place for a number of years, and we are required to update that under Act 91. But I will also talk a little bit about some of the Act 250 reforms too under Act 181, and specifically Tier 3. But I'm going to be providing just kind of that background context on the legislation to allow Alex to talk more in detail about Tier 3 and the rulemaking process. All of this is wrapped up in the Act 181 legislation, so I do want to take some time just to go over that. At Windham Regional, I primarily do municipal technical planning support, so work with Grafton on different land use planning issues. And right now I'm managing the regional plan update process for Windham Regional to comply with Act 181. So we are kind of in the early stages of our regional plan update, but it's a good chance to just get Grafton up to speed about where we're at. But there's a lot more work we'll be doing, so this is not the final conversation we'll be having with Grafton as it relates to our regional plan. So I'll let Alex provide an introduction.
Hi, everybody. My name's Alex Weinhagen. I'm one of the 5 board members on the Land Use Review Board. We are the board that oversees the state's Act 250 program. And honestly, I'm a newbie. Our board was formed earlier this year. It was part of the Act 181 reform effort. And for about 22 years prior to that, I was in your shoes. I was a municipal planner with the town of Heinsberg, south side of Chittenden County, and that's where my experience and my knowledge come from is the municipal side of things, and I'm sort of bringing that know-how to the Act 250 program and trying to help inform it with what's practical and pragmatic at the municipal level and what happens at in our communities. But yep, that's who I am, and I'll go after Matt to tell you a little bit more about this Tier 3 rulemaking.
Morgan, if you want to.
Oh, I think I know everybody in the room, but if not, I'm Morgan Over, Town Administrator. I'm happy that we can have this discussion. It's great that we have so many participants tonight to help share information. And I do see that Kathy, the chair of our select board, is online as well. So just a quick housekeeping thing. We do have the microphones available, and there's 2 for the public. If you're not interested in using the microphone, if you could at least stand up and kind of introduce yourself just so that your voice carries a little bit better, that would be great. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think you should have the slides that I sent you. So great.
and one thing I should mention, so you have 2 commissioners appointed to the Windham Regional Commission, Cheryl Kaufman and Eric Stevens. So just letting you know that you represent your select board appoints them to represent the town.
And you can just skip ahead to the next slide. Great, thanks. So as I mentioned, I wanted to provide just a brief overview. I'll try to keep it brief about the Act 181 legislation. So it was passed by the legislature in 2024. It makes significant changes to Vermont's land use planning and regulatory framework. and primarily in 3 areas as it relates to regional planning, the state designation program, and Act 250. So in terms of regional planning, the most significant reform is Act 181 now requires the 11 regional planning commissions that work across the state to do their regional future land use mapping using consistent land use districts. So prior to this, each regional planning commission had their own future land use districts. If you're familiar with the Grafton Town Plan, the town also has proposed land use districts in that town plan. So it's, generally these are the types of land uses that we expect to see in different areas of town and intensity of development. So at the regional level, we have similar proposed land use districts. Again, they're not regulatory. They're providing general guidance for future land use and development. So we now have those consistent land use categories that regional planning commissions are mapping out. The legislation also reforms the state designation program. So you might be familiar with Grafton's designated village center. And so that's mostly just around the core of the village here. That's a state program managed under the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And that provides, one of the primary benefits is it provides property owners with tax benefits for building the rehabilitation programs. It also allows the town to have better eligibility chances for certain state grants and other benefits as well. But the legislation also reforms that program to make for a more simplified process. So there's nothing Grafton needs to do. You have a village center and that will continue on. I'll talk about it a little bit, but through the Act 181 changes and the work we're going to be doing on our future land use map, there might be an opportunity for expansion of your village center. So I think that's something for the town to look at, and we can assist the town with that conversation. And then the third major reform under the legislation is the changes to Act 250. So for those that are not familiar with Act 250, it is the statewide land use permitting process. Up until now, it was triggered based on the size of a project. So how big of a commercial project, how many lots under a residential subdivision. For towns that don't have zoning and subdivision like Grafton, the threshold for what triggers Act 250 is lower. So for communities that have zoning and subdivision in place, that threshold was slightly higher. So more projects would not require Act 250. But the big change under Act 181 is to, instead of setting up Act 250 as just a, how big of a commercial development and how many residential lots are you proposing to build on, is trying to look at areas in the state that are more suited for growth and development. So, areas where you have existing development, you have infrastructure, things like that to support more development, and to try to make it easier under Act 250 for development to happen in those places where it's more suited, but also looking at critical resource areas in the state and making sure that Act 250 is strong enough, and how to strengthen Act 250 when it comes to development in those areas that have those critical natural resources. So I'll talk about it a little more, but you may have heard of like the different tiers: tier 3, tier 2, tier 1. So tier one is generally those areas where under this legislation, the state wants to encourage more growth. Tier 3 is those are the areas with more critical natural resources that need a closer look and potentially additional regulations under Act 250. And then tier 2 is essentially the status quo, I guess. So under every area that would be classified as tier 2 would still have those same triggers that exist under Act 250 today, depending on the size and scale of the project, whether or not an Act 250 permit would be required. We can go to the next slide. So this might be a little difficult to read if you're sitting further away from the screen, but this provides kind of a visual overview of the new Act 181 framework. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'll because it's a little, maybe we can zoom in. That's great. Yeah. So for our regional plan for future land use categories, as I mentioned, these are the new statewide land use districts that all RPCs are mapping. And the first 4 areas, downtown and village centers, planned growth areas and village areas, these are areas where these are areas where growth can best be supported, growth and development. So this is, existing downtown and village centers. So that would include Grafton's Village Center. Planned growth areas and village areas are areas surrounding a downtown center. So I think we can all think of, you have your historic core of the village center, but then there's often residential neighborhoods surrounding that. So the planned growth area and village area categories take into account those areas that are immediately adjacent to a center. And then there are 3 kind of, I call them special planning areas. So there's transition areas. So this refers to like along a state highway, there might be some commercial development that it's not directly connected to a village center. But it might be an area where a community it can support additional growth, and the community wants to see that area over time transform into something that is more compact, maybe includes residential uses, and is not just kind of commercial strip development. Enterprise districts, that refers to kind of larger scale commercial, industrial development, also larger scale earth resource extraction areas. And then resource-based recreation, that refers in our area primarily to ski resorts. In other parts of the state, there are other types of resource-based recreation areas, but that would include Stratton and Mount Snow and areas like that. And then the third general category for land use districts is the rural areas. And so there's hamlets, which are smaller settlements that don't quite qualify as a village center. And then there's 3 categories under rural. There's rural general, rural agriculture and forestry, and rural conservation. So rural general is kind of a catch-all land use district in rural parts of our region. Rural agriculture and forestry. This applies to larger parcels of land that are in active agricultural or forestry use, or larger parcels of land that are enrolled in the current use program, for example. And as we're doing our mapping process, we're mapping those areas out kind of where there are blocks of those land uses. So where there are more established blocks of larger forest parcels or agricultural parcels. And then conservation, rural conservation, that refers to areas that are already under conservation. It might be state conservation, a town forest land, Forest Service, or it's areas that have critical natural resources that where the intention is to conserve those areas and not to develop them. So those are the land use districts that we at Windham Regional Commission need to map out. So we already have a regional land use plan. we just updated our regional plan in July of this year. We are required to update our regional plan by December of 2026, so in about a year from now, to map out these new land use districts. And I do want to note too that often when we have conversations with towns about Act 181 and our regional land use mapping, when I talk about rural conservation, sometimes rural conservation and tier 3 are thought of as the same thing, but they are different things. So what we map out as rural conservation doesn't directly mean that that area is tier 3. So it's a separate, the tier 3, and Alex will get into this, but the tier 3 mapping process is separate from our process. So that's the changes when it relates to as it relates to our regional plan.
And can I note one
Yeah.
thing?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So just one thing I'll just note there, because it's close enough, right, it's here. So for a lot of regions, these land use categories up here were new. For us, they're basically the same ones we've been using for at least 20-something years, maybe longer, maybe 30 years. The difference is gonna be primarily over in, it's just, we're gonna have to be defining some lines, and then some area that we may have recalled, was it rural residential and rural productive rural, I think is what we currently call it. That there may be some color, different changes in like shadings, but generally speaking, for our future land use maps, with the exception of the planned growth areas and village areas, that's where we're going to be working with towns to kind of, that'll be a collaborative effort to define where those areas are. But basically, if you look at our plan right now, it's largely what you're going to see. Now, we're going to be doing a lot of public outreach and engagement.
Yeah.
But the only reason I'm bringing it up is not anticipating any surprises. And there's really a chance that, like, if our regional plan hasn't affected anything on you and your property for the last 30 years, it's probably not going to this time around. And the planned growth areas and village areas, part of the point of that is really creating more incentives and identifying in the state, like where they should make infrastructure investments. You guys just had a whole conversation right about whether or not to proceed with wastewater and that kind of thing. And so that's why that's going to be a collaborative effort about really having a more focused conversation statewide, like where housing is appropriate and more commercial and industrial development is appropriate. But anyway, just wanted to say that if you will go look at the regional plan that we have in place right now, the new one is going to look remarkably like that, just because we've been doing this for a while. But for other regions, it was a big change. For Rutland and Northeast Kingdom and other areas, it's going to be a big change.
The names on the map will be different and the colors will be different because we all have to use the same colors now statewide. But other than that, I mean, I think Chris is right. I think it's largely will be the same. We do have to do our mapping based on the definitions and statute. So, and because our plan at the end, Wyndham Regional Commission will adopt our plan, but then it has to be approved by the Land Use Review Board, and they're reviewing it based on the statute standards. But
and the only last thing I'll just note is we don't anticipate any major changes to our policies, the plan policies. And that's really, when it comes to Act 250, it's the policies that really have standing. And so again, if you want to see what it exists right now, so you can see what's I think 99.9% likelihood of carrying right over into the new one. And frankly, the policies in the current plan were very similar to the ones 8 years ago. Were very similar to the ones 8 years prior to that. So so it's been pretty stable. But you go to www.wyndhamregional.org, or if Morgan knows how to get in touch with us. But anyway,
and just to jump down to the next line here in terms of changes to the state designation program. So I think I mentioned this, but one of the changes is that previously a town, like if Grafton did not have a village center designation, the town would have to apply with the state Department of Housing and Community Development for that village center designation. Now with Act 181, if a town wants a village center designation, or Grafton, if there's an opportunity to expand your center designation. Wyndham Regional maps out what we think the village center should be, and once the land use review board approves our plan, you have your village center. So it's trying to make it easier for towns to get a village center or expand it where it makes sense. So anything that's a downtown center or village center that we map out will automatically become a center under the state designation program. And then anything that we map as planned growth area or village area automatically becomes a neighborhood, which is a different designation program with different incentives under the state program. And then for Act 250, so I'll jump down to where it says Tier 1A and Tier 1B. So, and again, this ties back to what we're doing, our mapping. So any areas that are mapped as a downtown or village center or a planned growth area are eligible for Tier 1A, which means full exemption under Act 250. So that would mean that, right, a project would not need an Act 250 permit and would just need local approval. Tier 1B is those same 3 districts plus village areas. And that is just for certain types of housing projects. So housing projects, actually on the next slide, I have information on it, but so I'll get to that. But I do want to note for Tier 1A and Tier 1B, towns do need to have zoning and subdivision in place. And so Grafton right now would not be eligible for either of those exemptions under Act 250. And so if a town doesn't have Tier 1A or Tier 1B, then all these districts are just Tier 2 status quo. So there's no changes. There are some additional requirements in terms of for road developments that include new roads that was passed under Act 181, but generally, if you're not qualifying for those Tier 1 exemptions, then it's just the same Act 250 program. And then over on the right-hand side, I just note for Tier 3, again, it's not tied to the mapping that we're doing, so it's subject to rulemaking that Land Use Review Board is working on, and that's not derived from the regional map. And so this just kind of presents the same information, but in a different format. So I think I've mostly covered this. I just want to note with Tier 1B, so Tier 1B is just exemption for residential projects that are 50 units or less involving 10 acres or less of land. But I think I covered all this in the previous slide, but it's just another way to present the information. So, so as I,
Excuse me, can I ask a
sure, yeah,
clarifying question? So, we do have a village center designation, but we do not have zoning.
Mhm.
So does that mean we have the exception or we do not have the exception?
You're gonna be just like you've always been.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
though we have the village center designation.
Right, because you have to have zoning and you have to have subdivision regulations.
Okay,
Yeah.
and not to spend too much time on that
Yeah.
tonight, but,
yeah,
the possible expansion of the village center area, is
Yeah.
that something that WRC is gonna be?
Yeah, we'll be collaborating with you guys.
Yeah.
And it's not, so we work with the plan committee, it's not, we're just not gonna say, here it is.
Yeah.
But we'll
Yeah, yeah,
come
yeah.
and meet with you.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah, and if anyone has questions, feel free to jump in too. So just to give you a sense of, as I mentioned, there's a new approval process for our regional plan. So previously, it was just the commission would adopt the regional plan. Now, after Wyndham Regional adopts the plan, it goes to the Land Use Review Board for approval. With the approval from the Land Use Review Board, again, towns would automatically get those state designation or eligibility for the state designation programs based on the mapping. And then towns that are opting into that Act 250 exemption I know right now this wouldn't be applicable for Grafton, but towns that want tier 1B exemption, they just need to request that as part of our, and we submit that request along with our regional plan. And so they can just opt into that, and they get that approval with the regional plan approval. For the full tier 1A exemption, that requires a separate application process that is just between the town and the land use review board. We can go to the next slide. So this is the last slide I have. I just want to give you a sense of where we are at in our regional plan update. So we're still kind of in phase 1 where we're doing the draft mapping based on those new land use district requirements. And then we're starting to do outreach to towns this fall, and that's going to continue into the winter to review those draft maps and get feedback from towns and then update maps as needed. So we have not completed the map for Grafton yet, but that will be done in the next 2 to 3 months. And then we would be meeting, for most towns, we're meeting with the planning commission to go over that and get their feedback. And so I'll be reaching out to Morgan and to the planning commission chair in the next few weeks about setting that meeting up once we have that draft map completed. But that's another opportunity for members of the public to attend that meeting. We'll be posting the draft map on our website to review. Yeah, for Grafton, I think a lot of the conversation will be around, opportunities if the town would like to expand that village center designation, but certainly we'll look at how we're mapping out some of the rural parts of town and if there are any questions or concerns about that. So the engagement with towns to review those maps will go through this winter, and then we'll complete a draft of our regional plan next spring and summer. Our plan gets submitted to the land use review board for a 60-day review period by the board and state agencies. And then we'll update the plan based on comments from the state and the LURB. And then we'll be submitting our plan next fall ahead of the December 2026 deadline. So that's all I had just about Act 181 and kind of our role in that process. I'm happy to answer any questions people might have.
I guess it's time for Alex.
Okay.
Okay, well, that was a lot. So somebody must have a question. I think you just need a little time to work up to it. Any questions or thoughts on this Act 181 business and what the regional plan is doing or not doing?
I have a question. So Matt, I'm Suzanne from Grafton. I just need a little bit of clarification about the correlation between the town regional plan and tiers 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
quite understand why there need to be 2 systems.
Yeah.
And if you could just clarify that, because the
Yeah.
reason I'm asking is that I heard you say that for the most part, because we have been actively engaged in this kind of planning to date.
Yeah.
Our town will not necessarily be affected by the changes in the regional plan. But does that also apply to the changes in tier 1, 2, and 3? Might our town be affected by those changes?
Yes, that's a good question. So yeah, the town will be affected by changes as it relates to tier 3, that process. Right now, because the town has subdivision bylaws, but not the zoning bylaws. So the town would not be under statute, the town would not be eligible for tier 1. For the tier 1 exemption. So Grafton will, at this point, only be tier 2 or tier 3. Does that,
I think what you're getting at too is the big difference is, and Alex will get into this about in the rulemaking, is as Matt said, it used to be that it was the size of the project, right? It used to be, are you 5 lots? If you don't have zoning right with a five lot threshold subdivided, and then that would trigger Act 250, or was it greater than two? I can't remember the commercial. Was it greater than 2 acres?
1 acre?
Sorry, Alex, it's 1 acre. 1 acre. And so that's what would trigger Act 250. Now with tier 3 coming in, it's going to be it's going to be the nature of things in the landscape, like forests and streams and rivers and lakes that are gonna trigger it. And so that is called and again we will let Alice get into it, but so the big difference is there's gonna be a new jurisdictional trigger. But otherwise, beyond that, it's gonna be basically the same for you guys. I mean, so it is a big difference for individual landowners. But and the other thing I'll just note real quick too is that, for years, we've adopted the regional plan, the town's adopted its own plan. And if the towns choose to, under Vermont law, they can ask for towns adopt their plans. They can ask for regions to approve their plans. And that sounds like an ominous thing, but it's not. Basically what it is, it basically asks the regional commission to confirm that the town plan is consistent with statute, that it doesn't conflict with the regional plan, and importantly, it doesn't conflict with adjoining town plans. And so, in all the work that we're doing, because it's not going to be like a radical change, we've been working with you guys on collectively on our planning anyway, if that makes sense. So the biggest difference that's gonna, as far as the life of an average Graftonite, Grafton, person who lives in Grafton, is going to be whether or not, unless you're doing unless under the old way, if you were developing a commercial property greater than 1 acre or greater, or if you were going to do a 5 acre plus lot subdivision, you would go in the Act 250. Now it's going to be based more on what type of landscape are you in, and that'll be a trigger. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
It's very helpful. I think it will make more sense over time.
Yeah.
Especially as we understand the triggers. That sounded like an important element.
And that's what Alice was going to do.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
for that information.
And maybe just to continue on that, so the determination of the tier 3 areas. There's a draft of those already. And what is now the process of the actual determination, the final determination of the tier 3 areas? Is that part of what we're talking about here tonight, Alex?
that's what Alex will.
Is that a good segue to you, Alex?
But
Yeah.
WRC plays a role in that. No,
No, ma'am.
you do not.
Yeah.
We have one question online, and I think this is exactly what we're talking about now, and it's from Kathy. She says, as you draft the plans for Grafton, does the community have any input? Also, can you show the maps for tier 3 for Grafton as it stands in terms of conservation areas? What's the main reason for such things? And I think that's a perfect segue into what Alex is.
If I can just real quick answer the first part of the question. So the first part is yes.
Yeah.
That'll be a collaborative process where we will be with our proposed regional plan map, make sure the town, we meet with the planning commission and say, hey, is this job okay with you?
Right.
Again, I'm not anticipating any surprises, and but tier 3 is a different set of maps, and go for it out.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yes, so we are definitely talking about two different things, even though they're related. And what the Regional Planning Commission works on is the regional plan and making sure that Grafton's municipal plan feeds into that and that there's a good nexus there. But when we talk about the tiers, it really has very little to do with the regional plan and has everything to do with the Act 250 program, which is, as Chris and Matt mentioned, the state's statewide development review program in the past, generally for larger developments. So, yeah, I'm here tonight to help answer questions, and particularly with regard to the Act 250 program, and to tell you a little bit about the Tier 3 rulemaking specifically. But I'm happy to field questions on the connections between what the regional plan is doing and what Act 250 is doing, although they are separate. So Act 250. I'm not there in the room, so I can't read your faces and know, to what extent everyone there understands what Act 250 is. In my longer presentations, I go into a fairly detailed dog and pony show about what Act 250 is and what the current jurisdictional triggers are for development and which ones have to get a permit from Act 250 and which ones don't. I'll spare you all of that and just give you the thumbnail sketch, which is reinforcing what Matt said, that Act 250 is development review at the statewide level. So Grafton has a development review board and has subdivision regs. So when someone wants to divide their property, they need to come into your development review board and get a permit to do that and file a subdivision plat, and a survey and all of that. You don't have zoning. So when someone wants to build a structure that's not related to a subdivision, there may not be a permit at the local level. And Act 250 is there to require a permit at the state level if that construction is big enough. And so, as Matt and Chris mentioned, for many years, the 55 years that Act 250 has been around here in Vermont, commercial development on a lot of 1 acre or more triggers the need for an Act 250 permit. So somebody has a 3 acre lot, they're looking to do auto repair, and you're going to build a small garage on that lot. Maybe they live there as well. It's greater than 1 acre. They need an Act 250 permit for that commercial development. Or if they're doing a subdivision, and let's say they're building, they're going to subdivide into 7 lots. That's large enough to trigger the need for an Act 250 permit at the statewide level in Grafton. Similarly, if there was a housing project that was creating more than 10 units of new housing, that would require an Act 250 permit. And the Act 250 program, as I imagine many of you are somewhat familiar, it's a state permitting program, but it has regional level review. So we have 9 district commissions around the state. They function very much like Grafton's Development Review Board, in that there are volunteers that serve on those district commissions. Those volunteers are appointed by the governor, and they sit and hear development applications for projects that trigger the need for an Act 250 permit. The vast majority of those Act 250 permits are dealt with by those commissions administratively, without a public hearing, without a big to-do. They're called minor permits, and the vast majority of Act 2 permits are minor permits. The ones you hear about in the news are the major permits, the ones that do have a public hearing. Maybe there's a neighbor group that's got an issue with the project. And those have a more formal process with a public hearing, and then a formal decision by the district commission. But even within the world of the Act 250 permits that we issue each year, the 300 to 400 Act 250 permits that are issued across the state, the vast majority are minors and are approved administratively. And in the overall aggregate, approximately 2% are appealed, whether they're a minor or a major permit. So the vast majority of Act 250 permits are issued and are not appealed. But the media likes to pick up on the ones that are, and those are the horror stories that you hear about projects that have been held up for a year or 3 years and have cost a lot of money, and they are the exception within the Act 250 program. So with that as sort of an intro, let me give you a little bit of information about the tiers that we have been talking about, and I'll launch into a little presentation so that there are some slides to guide us And I'm just going to share my screen. I sent a request to Morgan to share. And here we go. Okay, so as Matt indicated, within the reform effort, which was Act 181, passed in 2024, it sought to change the Act 250 program and create 3 tiers. So imagine the state of Vermont painted with just 3 colors, red, blue, and green, for example. And the tier 1 areas, as was previously mentioned, are areas that will have reduced or no Act 250 permitting within them. These are areas within our villages and downtowns that have existing zoning and subdivision regs and are capable of dealing with development review without the state being involved through the Act 250 program. Tier 3 is what I'm really here to talk to you about tonight, and that is the opposite end of that spectrum. These are the areas that are the most sensitive critical natural resources, where jurisdiction would be expanded. And so more development, more types of development would require an Act 250 permit if they were proposed in these tier 3 critical natural resource areas. And then there's tier 2, which will paint the vast majority of the state. And that is largely status quo under the current Act 250 jurisdiction, with one important wrinkle regarding the construction of new roads over a certain distance. And I'll get into that at the end. So imagine Vermont painted in 3 colors. Most of Vermont is going to be in tier 2. A little bit of Vermont around our downtowns and villages, it will be in tier 1. And tier 3 will be also just a little bit of Vermont in these most critical natural resource areas. Right off the bat, there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what tier 3 means. We are talking about designating specific areas on the landscape, so people will know where these are. But these are not areas where development is prohibited. These are areas where development requires an Act 250 permit. In fact, there's the assumption that there will be development in these tier 3 areas. And because of that, we think the legislature felt that some additional level of review to ensure good design would be necessary. So just to make sure everyone's on the same page, tier 3 is not a no-go zone. It's a get a permit zone, essentially. So we formed a working group at the front end of this process in the spring of this year to get the process started. There are about 25 members on that working group with representation from various divisions within the Agency of Natural Resources. We have representation from a couple of environmental groups. We have representation from the Ski Areas Association, the Realtors Association, the Tax Department, Vermont Woodlands, who represents forest owners, the Professional Loggers Association of New England. So there's a sort of a wide variety of stakeholders that are part of the working group. And that working group looked at a whole host of potential resource areas to consider for tier 3 inclusion. This is a list of the 17 resource areas that the group looked at. The ones that are highlighted are the ones that sort of rose to the top. These areas, many of these areas are already protected through state level permitting. Wetlands is a good example of that. River corridors is another good example of that. And so the working group and my board felt like we did not need to extend Act 250 jurisdiction into critical natural resource areas that already had a targeted permitting program in place or on the way. And so most of these areas that we considered, we set aside and said these are adequately protected or will be through existing permitting, and we can focus in instead on the ones that are not covered. So in a nutshell, we landed on these 3 areas to include in this first draft of the tier 3 areas. The first being significant natural communities, which are mapped by Vermont Fish and Wildlife. The second being headwater stream areas, but a very small slice of headwater stream areas, specifically the slice of those that are coincident with the steepest slopes, where the runoff would be the greatest. Also, the areas that have the most poorly drained soils, again, where the runoff would be the greatest and the potential downstream impacts from flooding would be the highest. And those areas within an elevation range, a higher elevation range, again, because gravity means more damage downstream. And then finally, the third area were habitat connectors. And I'll walk you through each of these so you understand what we're talking about. So the first area that we looked at and is included in this first draft of the Tier 3 rules are significant natural communities. These are ecologically similar areas across the landscape. So imagine you're walking on the top of a mountain and there's a lot of sort of crumults and very stunted trees and shrubs. That's a particular ecological type that exists only in that area. That's a type of natural community. Imagine at a lower elevation, like a dry red pine stand of trees. That's a different sort of natural community. Vermont Fish and Wildlife identifies the most significant and representative examples of these various community types across the state, both on public and private land. And they do boots on the ground sort of delineation of where these areas are with landowner permission, of course. And the most significant ones they map. And they give a rarity index for each of them, from very rare, it's on a scale of 1 to 5. So the S1s and S2s are the very rare and rare types, to the uncommon or even common types. And for the purposes of Tier 3 mapping, Fish and Wildlife recommended that we include the very rare and rarest types of significant natural communities because they feel like they have a very good sense of the universe of those within the state, probably having mapped 85 to 90% of those across the state. They represent a very small slice of the land area in Vermont. Just about 16,000 acres of Vermont's nearly 5 million acres. But they're sensitive. And so anyways, these are the significant natural communities that landed in the Tier 3 mapping, but only the upland versions of those, not the wetland ones. Why? Because Vermont has a very robust wetland permitting program at the state level. And so Act 250 review is not needed to protect wetland significant natural communities. We have another permit process that already does that. Headwater streams was one of the other ones I mentioned. And initially I thought this one is going to be great. Like those are the most sensitive areas with all the flooding that's happened, especially the Irene flooding that happened in 2011 in Grafton. We've got to make sure that development in these upper portions of the watershed, goes through a reasonable review process so that it's not going to contribute to flooding downstream. Well, as it turns out, there are a lot more headwater streams per the definition than I thought there were in the state. We have a lot of elevation and topography and streams. Our initial mapping has them covering nearly 90% of the state. So just like with significant natural communities, our working group sought to focus in on the most sensitive areas within those upper watersheds. And as I mentioned earlier, we did a simple mapping intersection where we said, show me the areas that have 35% or greater slope, very steep slopes. Intersect that with areas that have poorly drained soils from USDA soil mapping, and then intersect both of those with areas that are above 1,200 feet in elevation. And we were able to pinpoint the most sensitive areas that we went from 90% of the state as a headwater stream watershed area to just 2.2% of the state. And I'll show you those in Grafton in just a moment. Finally, habitat connectors. The statute required us to look at the potential for mapping habitat connectors of statewide significance as a Tier 3 resource. And the working group felt like it was an important area to focus on. Vermont Fish and Wildlife has a wonderful data set called and sort of protocol called Vermont Conservation Design, in which they've mapped all the forested areas as well as wetlands and other areas across the state with very high resolution remote sensing. And they have then prioritized those areas. And so the map you're seeing on the left is showing the highest priority connectivity blocks of forest across the state. Dark orange are the highest priority and light yellow are the priority areas. And especially the dark orange really creates the network by which wildlife and plants are able to move across the state as climate changes, as species disperse over time, as small populations of species move, sometimes leaving an area and migrating into a different area over time. This is the network within which that happens. And I should have had another map here to show you that this network is not exclusive to Vermont. Vermont is sort of a linchpin in the overall northern forest area. We are the connection point between the large forests in the Adirondacks and the large forests in northern New Hampshire, northern Maine, and Quebec. And so the ability for wildlife and plants to move across the northern forest hinges on what happens here in Vermont. So again, we've got a great data set from Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And initially my thought was, well, they've already mapped the highest priority wildlife connectivity areas. Let's just make those all tier 3. Turns out they represent about 60% of the state. And both my board and the working group felt we're not going to establish Act 250 jurisdiction for every development over that span of Vermont. It's overreach. We need to be more targeted. And so Vermont Fish and Wildlife proposed a mapping sort of algorithm where we would take those highest priority areas and look at the road segments that divide them, because typically blocks of forest are divided by roads, and pick out the road segments that still had intact forest on both sides and call those out as habitat connectors for the future, and a place where we might want to have Act 250 review ensure that development along those roads doesn't completely eliminate the ability of wildlife to move from one side to the other. And so we were able to refine the mapping and get that down to a much smaller area. Now, a logical question you might be asking is, well, okay, so if you're establishing a permit review process for wildlife connecting habitat near roads, what happens if there's development in the interior of those forests on either side of the roads and there's no review of that? It's a good question. And it speaks to another facet to the Act 250 reform that Act 181 provided, and that is to establish jurisdiction through Act 250 for any development that creates a road of more than 800 feet. This is separate from this Tier 3 business, and so I'll talk about it at the end of this talk, but that is the mechanism by which the interior forest areas will go through Act 250 review. So, in a nutshell, here are the Tier 3 areas mapped across the state in this current draft, and I'll explain where we are in the timeline for that draft so you understand what the opportunities are for more input and revision. We've narrowed it down to between 5 and 9% of Vermont and in these Tier 3 areas at the moment, broken up into these 3 particular areas. So I won't bore you with the draft rule, but I will tell you it's available on our website, and it's just 5 pages. The lawyers have not gotten a hold of it yet, and it's just in plain regular person speak. So it's not a hard read, and I would encourage you after this, if you're interested, to visit our Tier 3 website, take a look at the draft rule so you can get a better understanding of sort of the ins and outs of it. I will give you just a few highlights, and those are that Act 250 the need for an Act 250 permit would trigger for most development within these Tier 3 areas, but it would not trigger under this draft of the rules for subdivision of property. We would leave that to Grafton to figure out and issue permits for dividing lots. But when there was an actual construction project proposed in these Tier 3 areas, that's when an Act 250 permit would be required. We are honing where that jurisdiction would apply. One of the complaints about Act 250 over the years is that you might have a large parcel, you do something on one corner of it, and it triggers the need for an Act 250 permit, and that Act 250 permit attaches to the entire parcel forever, no matter what you're doing on the parcel. We are looking to change that within these tier 3 areas and make sure that the Act 250 permitting jurisdiction only applies to the area within the tier 3 mapping that is being impacted, and it will not attach to the larger parcel outside of that tier 3 area. Finally, we know that statewide mapping is not without error, and that on the ground reality has to be considered. And so there is a provision in the rule for site specific corrections if there's a clear error in the statewide mapping, or if a landowner has just better data that they can bring to bear. Act 250 has been around for 55 years, and it's not an uncontroversial permitting process at the statewide level. As a result, there have been lots of exemptions built into Act 250 through statute over the years. All of those exemptions will carry through to these tier 3 areas. Even though they are the most critical natural resource areas that are not protected by other permitting, the exemption system has to be retained the way the statute was constructed. So farming, logging, forestry, including road building for farming and forestry, most home occupations, but not all, accessory dwelling units, accessory apartments, at least until 2028. All of those existing exemptions from Act 250 will remain in these tier 3 areas. We are also constructing some additional exemptions within these areas so as not to trip people up for doing sort of their normal lives. So we are going to make sure that if you're in a tier 3 area, any construction within 50 feet of an existing structure would be exempt. Those impacts already exist. You don't need an Act 250 permit to put an addition on your house or to add on to your garage. We will exempt smaller structures of under 200 square feet, even if they're smack in the middle of a tier 3 area. These, a small shed is a small impact, and it's just it's not worth it to have that kind of very small project get an Act 250 permit. So these are some of the exemptions. I won't read them all, but they're in there. Again, I encourage you to look at the 5 pages we have drafted thus far so you can get a sense of the specifics. Here's where we are in the timeline, and then I'll get to a map of Grafton, but I'll take some questions first. This process kicked off in April, May of this year. Tier 3 doesn't actually go into effect until December 31st of next year, of 2026. We have a long runway to be able to put out iterative drafts, get public feedback, do engagement, and finalize the rules. We are about halfway through at this point. The working group has been working really hard. We did a round of public engagement at the end of October. We're still doing that tonight. And the working group and the board are going to be developing the next draft early part of next year. And we will go out and do additional public engagement probably in March of next year. Based on that, we'll make additional revisions, and then we'll be coming back for sort of final public hearings and engagement in May of 2026. And ultimately, this new jurisdictional framework within Tier 3 areas will go into effect at the end of 2026. I think that's all I wanted to talk about immediately. I really wanted to show you a map of Grafton so you could see where these Tier 3 areas are. But I do want to let you know that regardless of whether this is the first time you're hearing about this or whether you've been plugged in for the last couple of months, it is not too late to have an impact and to get your opinions on the table, whether it's something that the municipality wants to forward to our board for input, or just a citizen in Grafton or the surrounding areas. And I'm I'm your guy for that. So you can call me. I will pick up the phone or at least, get back to you. You can email me. I'm happy to come back to another meeting and talk more about specifics. I'm also happy to just meet with folks individually, landowners, planning commissions, what have you, to sort of better explain the details. But because the drafting is happening in an iterative fashion, you will have multiple opportunities to provide comment, both now, today, in the lead up to the next draft, which we'll be trying to formalize through January. And then you'll have an opportunity to comment on that next draft, and then again, the final draft in May of next year. So there's plenty of opportunity. There is not a firm deadline. You don't have to worry about like, oh, Alex said I have to get my comments in by Christmas. Otherwise, I will not be heard. That's not the case. We'll be taking comments all the way through the process. Does anybody have general questions before I show you a map of Grafton and where these tier 3 areas are?
Shaking your head.
We wanna see the
All
map.
All right, the map, here it comes. Sorry to talk for so long. Let me stop this share and share the map.
We also know like the screen.
Alex, if I could, this is Tom Charlton in the state rep, you and I met Mr. Winter at the public hearing. I have the tier 3 map on my iPad, so if people have questions about a specific parcel or road, we can look it up, I'll be direct with it.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah,
Oops.
there's a question in the chat, but I think it relates specifically to the reuse of the school. So that,
Okay. Well, how about we get to the map first, and then we'll get to the chat question. So just to tease you a little bit more, this is the website. Go there. Sometime after this meeting, a little light reading. It gives you an introduction to this tier 3 business. What does it really mean? It has the draft rules. And most importantly, under the materials and resources section, it has a link to the map viewer that I'm about to show you, this tier 3 map viewer. So there's a presentation, there's a draft rule, and then there's the map viewer. You click on the map viewer, you get a splash screen that looks like this. And so these are all the sort of like, here's the fine print, here's the explanation. It forces you to click, I understand and wish to continue, and then continue in order to see the map. Every time you launch the map viewer, this will come up. So don't worry if you click through and then you're like, oh, I want to read more about how they did that layer. You can just reopen the map viewer and this will come up each time. Okay, without further ado, here's the map. So let's zoom into Grafton. The map is sort of ready to go with an aerial photo background. And on the right, you're going to see a dialog box that's titled Map Layers. This is where you get to play. You can turn on and off all of these layers to be able to see what it is that's being shown in the way that works best for your eyeballs. So right now, what's being shown is the aerial imagery, the base map with roads, and the tier 3 area layer is turned on. So I'm turning that on and off with that checkbox. But the only layer within it that's on is the headwater stream areas, which are showing in mint green. So if I turn those on and off, you can see them blink on and off. So as I indicated in the presentation, these headwater stream areas are very focused. They are not all of your headwater stream watersheds. They are the areas within those watersheds that have the steepest slopes, that have the poorly drained soils, and that are at an elevation above 1,200 feet. And so on the western side of Grafton, where you have more of your terrain, your topography, you're going to see more of those headwater stream areas called out. So I will now turn on the significant natural communities, which I mentioned are a very small slice of Vermont. You barely have any. So right here in the very corner of Grafton, along a river, there's a significant natural community mapped by Fish and Wildlife associated with the river. That's it for significant natural communities in Grafton. So now I'll turn on habitat connectors. And we haven't decided what distance away from the road to map for these habitat connector areas. We are looking at both an 800-foot radius and a 2,000-foot radius, which is why you're going to see this sort of strange fried egg color with the yolk of yellow on the inside being the 800-foot buffer off of the roads, and the olive green being the 2,000-foot buffer. So now that I've turned on all of these tier 3 layers, you're looking at the full tier 3 complement for the town of Grafton. Again, the headwater stream areas in the mint green, this little bit of significant natural community down here. And then in this northwest corner, these habitat connector areas where there's good forest cover on either side of Route 121, I think it is, Stagecoach Road. I'm not super familiar with your town roads, I'm sorry. And these are the areas that are mapped as habitat connectors as part of Tier 3. So just to bring it all home, what this means is that for development happening in these areas, generally speaking, an Act 250 permit would be needed. So if I zoom in a little bit, I'll zoom into this area. And you can see in the background, I'll turn the tier 3 areas off for a moment. You can see the parcel lines coming up in red. So I'll just zoom into a parcel. We'll turn on the tier 3 layer. So here's a home. You'll notice that we have cut out a buffer around all of the homes that are not going to be tier 3 areas. And so we're really focused on the forested areas that are away from homes. So again, let me turn this off. If this parcel right here, let's see if I can get it to select the parcel. Yep, this is a larger parcel, but if this parcel right here, let's say this person wanted to do plunk a house right on this corner, we would turn on the tier 3 layer. We would say, okay, that corner is within a habitat connector, an area that has good ability for wildlife to pass. And there's no existing development there. So construction of a house, more than 200 square feet, of course, of size, of impact, that would require an Act 250 permit. And if I zoom out, you can see sort of the nature of that. So I think that's about as simple as I can make it. I guess I should explain one more thing. You'll see on the map this red cross-hatching around the village area. And again, on the map layers, it's one of these layers that you can turn on and off. In the current draft of the rules, we're proposing to exclude any village area from having tier 3 in it. So if there were a tier 3 area that were mapped, but it was within your village center area, it would not be included in the tier 3 mapping. We would extract it because we don't want tier 3 areas to get in the way of the development and the future of your village area. We would like to keep Act 250 as far away from that as possible. So that's one more feature on the map. I guess I should show you just a couple other things. And there are some reference areas that are not tier 3 areas, but help sort of get your bearings. You can turn them on and see where are there elevations of more than 2,500 feet, for example. Those are currently subject to Act 250 review for most development. You don't have any in Grafton. And some other layers that I'll explain in a moment. So you just scroll up and down and you can turn on and off layers.
And Alex, just to be clear, like in the example you just gave, by requiring the Act 250 permit, it doesn't say you can't build that house. It's going to mean you can build a house, but you want more information about how much clearing there's going to be and how much. I mean, just more details about it, right?
Yeah, so for folks who are not familiar with the Act 250 review process, there are 10 criteria that all projects get reviewed under. And It's very comprehensive. It's everything from will the project have an impact on the local school to does the project have proper stormwater treatment, to does the project conform with the Grafton town plan? So, as well as very specific things like wetland impacts and the like. So it's a comprehensive review. And for larger projects, oftentimes many of those review criteria are substantive and there's something to talk about. For that single house on that parcel that I showed you, most of the 10 review criteria are not going to be applicable. It's just a very small project. It's not going to have an impact on your school. It's probably going to be consistent with your town plan. Maybe not, but probably. It's unlikely to have a lot of stormwater impacts. And so principally, it's going to be reviewed under very limited criteria that are relevant to the resources that are specific to that parcel. And in this case, because it's a forested area, we're going to be looking at the extent to which the house can be sited in such a way that wildlife still have the ability to pass. And so how much of the road frontage is being developed, for example, and where is the house being placed in relation to that?
Alex, can I ask a question too? I know you had mentioned, oh, thanks, yeah, just a quick question. You had mentioned for under the current Act 250 process, most Act 250 permits are just administrative review. So I'm assuming for this example, like if that house needed a permit under tier 3, would that be presumably like an administrative review?
Yes, this would be a good example of a minor permit, which would go through an administrative review. So the district commission would still look at it, would still assess all of the 10 Act 250 criteria, but they would, instead of holding a public hearing, they would actually draft an approval first and then mail it to interested parties like neighbors and the such, saying, we think this is a minor project and we think it can be approved with these conditions. Here's the approval. If anybody thinks that this warrants a public hearing, we will hold one, but otherwise we're just going to approve this thing. That's what the minor permit process looks like in Act 250. So I'm happy to go into more details about why, the habitat connectors are where they are, for example. And I'm also happy to talk to you a little bit about this other expansion of Act 250 with regard to new road construction, but I don't want to overwhelm you, and I hope I didn't already. So other questions about tier 3 or how it works with Act 250?
Are y'all feeling better?
Well,
Yeah.
Okay. So, hi Alex, this is Lisa, this will again. So, this map, is final or not final to the extent that you said that you're still considering the 800 versus 2,000?
This map is very much draft. We need to decide about those habitat connectors, what the width will be, the yellow or the green, or something in between. And it is not final in any way, shape, or form. We are taking feedback on all parts of the rule and the mapping. So it will not be finalized until June.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, some communities that I talk to look at the map for their town and they say, my goodness, you missed a whole bunch of really important, sensitive natural resource areas that we think should be mapped as tier 3, where Act 250 permitting should happen. And I say, great, give me a map. Tell me why they're important, and we'll see if that makes sense to extrapolate at the statewide level. We can't do this on a town-by-town basis, but we can use individual towns' experience to sort of inform the larger effort. Other towns look at these maps for their town and say, this isn't fair. You're mapping so much more of our community than you are the community, the next county over. This is a disproportionate impact on my town. You need to fix that. And I say, great. Tell me more, and let's see how we can revise the maps to make it more equitable. So we're very much at the front end of this, and we're happy to get feedback on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, and so the legend in the right-hand corner is obscuring part of the eastern part of Grafton. So can we assume that there are actually no tier 3 areas?
No, it looks like the eastern edge of Grafton is, if you can see my cursor, is here.
Yeah.
And so
At large there.
Yeah.
on the eastern side, you have a bit of higher elevation area here with some headwater, steep slope areas, and that is tier 3 mapped. But otherwise, the bulk of the tier 3 mapping is really in the northwest corner. Anybody want to zoom into their parcel? Happy to do that.
I don't have a parcel.
No, but go ahead. you
Oh,
can-
okay, thank you. Alex, you have a tough job. I just had a couple of process questions. First of all, would you just kindly share briefly, very briefly, what is the land use review board? Who serves on it? How are they appointed? What is their role gonna be in making these final decisions? Are there any checks and balances to what you decide? Just quickly share with, and I may be the only one who needs this information, but I guess so be it. About the land use review board. It sounds like a pretty powerful board.
Yeah, a great question. I'll try to keep it brief because bureaucracy loves to talk about bureaucracy, and I'll be honest with you, I am a bureaucrat, so stop me if I go on for too long. So the Land Use Review Board is new. For a very long time, Act 250 was overseen by the Natural Resources Board, which was a 3-member board with only one full-time member, which was the chair. And as a part of the reform effort, the Natural Resources Board was abolished and the Land Use Review Board replaced it. So we are a 5-member board. And unlike before, where there was one actual full-time person, all 5 of us are full-time professional staff members. So we serve as a decision-making board, but we're also the ones that do a lot of the work because the bulk of our Act 250 staff are out there helping applicants and neighbors navigate the permitting process. And so it's really the 5 board members' job to do this level of rulemaking and implement the reforms that Act 181 laid out in statute. So we're a 5-member board. We're appointed by the governor. We can't have any more than one representative from each county. So we're spread out across the state. Our chair, Janet Hurley, lives in Southern Vermont. And our sort of ringer, who came from within the Act 250 program as a district coordinator, Kirsten Sultan, lives in Linden in the Northeast Kingdom. I live in Burlington. I'm the city boy on the board. Sarah Had is a Franklin County representative. She's up in the St. Albans area. And Brooke Dingledine was a former land use attorney who practiced within the Act 250 sphere and joined the board to bring that expertise. She lives in Randolph. So we're spread out across the state. And our role is not to review Act 250 applications. So that's what the district commissions do with the help of the district coordinators. We don't do that. Our role is to oversee the program, make sure that those district commissions are acting consistently across all 9 districts, which there have been some issues with that over time, and to promulgate rules to make sure that the program is doing the best job that it can, being efficient, pragmatic, and consistent across the state. And so rulemaking is one of the major tasks that our 5-member board does. And what And this tier 3 business is all about a rule. So basically, it was the legislature saying, we as a legislature can't figure this out. We can't figure out where the most critical natural resource areas that should go through Act 250 are. It's just too big of a job. So we're going to delegate that to this board and give them the ability to make law through rulemaking. And that's what we're doing with this tier 3 business is we're doing rulemaking. The way rulemaking works, it's kind of a Byzantine process. It's new to me. I'm used to like helping my community draft zoning regulations or subdivision regulations. Not really used to statewide rulemaking. So pardon me, but I'm learning as we go. The process is for my board to do that in a public way, to get input from the public formally, and to evaluate sort of economic impacts, natural resource impacts, and to pull that all together in the form of a rule that makes sense and will actually accomplish the statutory intent. But so we do have the final say. The legislature did in fact delegate this to the Land Use Review Board. However, in order for it to be given the deference in a court as the force of law, we need to bring our final rule to a committee of the legislature for their review and blessing. That committee is called the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. LCAR is the fun acronym. And so at the end of this process, in the summer of next year, after we've heard from all of you and have tried to incorporate as much of your feedback into the rule as possible, we'll take the final version and give it to the committee members on LCAR, and they'll look at it to see whether it implements the statutory charge that we were given. Hopefully they will say yes. That's usually the path. And when they do say yes, then the rule has the force of law in the courts, similar to what the legislature would create through lawmaking. And so that's the process. We go through rulemaking, we give it to LCAR, they bless it. And then in this case, the statute has a delayed implementation where it doesn't actually go into effect from a tier 3 standpoint until December 31st, 2026.
So just one follow-up question, Alex. I believe I heard you say you would give us your phone number.
I can share all of the slides too, and
Yeah,
I think it'll have all contacts.
That would be great, but I would like the contact information. Is that something you have already, Morgan? Alex's phone number that he
I do,
volunteered?
but if he wants to rattle it off on this now, that's fine too.
That would be great.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Let me put it back up on screen if I can. Hold on a moment. There it is. So I'll speak it. So, I'll speak
to
it
read
so
it?
it's on the record. Can you see the screen?
No.
It's 802-480-1885.
Thank you so much.
And all of us at the state have a similar email handle. It's just first name, period, last name @vermont.gov. So that's up there as well. alex.weinhagen@vermont.gov. More importantly, I would encourage you to visit our website, particularly the Tier 3 webpage. My contact information is there, so you don't have to remember it, and you can forward that to other folks and say, "Hey, here's that state bureaucrat we heard from. You better call him, and tell him what you think."
Yeah. So Alex, would love to ask you sort of an unpleasant question. I'm sure there have been a lot of comments and discussions around the possibility that some landowners may see a diminution of their property value as it has in a way become encumbered through no act of their own, through state of Vermont law that appears to may change their property value. It's not analogous to being under a trust And of course, a trust would be something that a landowner would voluntarily enter into. But this, in some cases, may have a little bit of a similar effect. That in the Act 250 process, development may be denied. Which then the landowner may say, well, this has reduced the value of my property. I had plans on doing X, Y, and Z, and now I cannot. So, do you want to comment on that discussion a little bit?
Sure. Yes, that's been a frequent concern raised at the public engagement sessions that we did across the state in late October, and in conversations I've had with people along the way. And the Vermont Realtors Association, who has a member on our working group for this Tier 3 rulemaking, has been making the same, raising the same concern from the start. So we're very aware of that concern. I think that we're trying very hard to be circumspect in both the mapping and the level of exemptions within the draft rule, so that the level of impact on a property is the least possible, while still ensuring that the resource gets adequate review. So, I think if you read the draft rule, you'll see that the exemptions are such so that typical development of an already developed lot is not likely to trigger Act 250, even if it's in a Tier 3 area, which is one way to address that issue. But there's no question that this will expand Act 250 jurisdiction and require a permit on properties that previously would not have required an Act 250 permit for a relatively small development, the creation of a new house, for example, or the small subdivision of someone who wants to create a new lot for their kid to build on. Those are things that would not typically have been required an Act 250 permit, maybe a subdivision permit from the town of Grafton, but not an Act 250 permit. And if those are happening in a Tier 3 area, they will require an Act 250 permit. And so I think the best I can say to the real estate value concern is that there's no intention for this to remove the ability to develop property. The intention is to ensure that that development goes through a reasonable review process. My philosophy as a former municipal official, when someone walked into my office in Heinsberg and said, I own 40 acres and I would like to do this. My philosophy was, I'm here to find a way to yes. So my job is not to stymie your goals and your ambitions. My job is to help you get the permits you need to do the project you want to do, with the understanding that as a community, we have decided that certain resources deserve consideration and sometimes protection, which might result in the need for that plan to shift or change or adapt in order to get to yes. So again, from a real estate transaction standpoint, I hear what the realtors are saying and I understand it. I am not personally convinced that the need for a permit diminishes the value of a property. But I understand their concern on that front, and that's why we're trying to do this in as focused and as a pragmatic a way as we possibly can. And that's why you're not seeing Tier 3 mapping that maps, half of Grafton or 60% of the state of Vermont. We are looking at, 4 to 8% of Vermont's land area. And we're trying to balance that across communities so there isn't disproportionate impact. So that's a really long-winded way of saying that I don't have a perfect answer for the concern about real estate value. But I will tell you that if you talk to your listers or your assessor in the town of Grafton, properties are valued based on their fair market value today. They are not valued based on the future development potential of the property. And so the fact that a property might be in a tier 3 area and might require an Act 250 permit is a future looking issue. And it is not necessarily going to impact how that property is assessed based on its fair market value today, how comparable properties are selling in that category today. So I'm not a realtor. I'm not even a lister, but I worked in a town office for a long time, shoulder to shoulder with listers. And that's my understanding of how property appraisals work.
Yeah.
And a hypothetical, I mean, too, I mean, all this is hypothetical, but you could also look at it from the inverse, which is that if you think about why a lot of people choose to move to Grafton and own property here, the prospect of a wildlife connector is probably a good thing, not a bad thing. Yeah.
For many, sure, yeah, so, but a question, from a landowner's point of view, those landowners whose land is affected, in being in or in part in tier 3, those landowners have received no communication about this so far. And it would appear that it would be fair to the landowners to be directly informed. This is happening now to your property as an outcome of this new law.
That's an excellent point, Lisa.
I completely agree. And we heard that at several of the public engagement sessions. The suggestion that we need to do more in terms of outreach, both to municipalities and landowners, and B, that direct notification of landowners who have tier 3 mapping on their property would be the ideal. We haven't done that direct outreach yet, in part because the maps are so draft at this point that it's a little premature to tell a landowner that they might be in a tier 3 area when we're not clear on exactly what the boundaries of those tier 3 areas are going to be. My hope is that when we revise the draft and hopefully hone in and tune it up in the first part of next year, that we will do more outreach. What I can't promise tonight, unfortunately, is that my board has the budget to send a piece of mail to every single landowner that has a tier 3 mapped area on their property around the state. I want to do that. Believe me, but I'm just not sure we have the budget to do that. So there may need to be other mechanisms by which we get that word out to those landowners. And it would be great, frankly, to partner with municipalities to help us do that. Not to put the onus on Grafton or Morgan, but just to work in partnership, with my program doing the legwork, but maybe you helping us in some way. So happy to take suggestions on ways to do that, given that it is kind of an expensive to do a blanket mailing to that many Vermonters.
Well, the grant list might be able to, and the listers might somehow be.
Did you have a question? There was another question.
Yeah, real quick, I don't wanna speak for the select board as a whole, but I will say that this is such an important issue for Grafton that, I think we're happy to bridge the gap as much as we can. We'll go back to Dan.
Thanks very much. I'm gonna do as you asked us to. Hi, Alex and Dan. I work for the Wyndham Foundation based here in Grafton. A few minutes ago, you were answering a question Suzanne had asked you. You said something that caught my ear, which had to do with the role of your board vis-a-vis the individual Act 250 commissions and the service offices that work with those commissions. Could you clarify? You said that part of your role as a board is to be ensuring consistency of how the rules are applied across the districts. Does that mean that your board has a supervisory function over these commissions and has authority over these commissions, and that these commissions have a reporting responsibility to your board? Or does it work in a different way?
That's a great question. Thanks for that. So I should have been a little bit clearer about which district Grafton is in. So Grafton is in what we call District 2. Not that that means anything to anyone outside of the Act 250 program, but our staff is based out of the Springfield office. And it's the District 2 Commission, if you were to look on our website, that are the folks that actually hear Act 250 applications. The chair of the District 2 Commission is Kelly Tully. And then there's Abby Corse, David Moulton, who are regular members, and 2 alternates, Cheryl Cox and Mark Mullen. Stephanie Guile is the district coordinator, the staff person who helps those district commissioners with permit application review. So to answer your question, we have no role to play in the district commission's review of an actual permit application. So my board does not get involved with their review of an application. They are a quasi judicial board that is under law charged with making their own decision under the statutory Act 250 review criterion. My board can't go in and veto what they decide. We can't tell them how to decide. So they are independent in that fashion. We don't supervise their decision making. With that said, all of the rules of the road that they go by, so that there are guidance documents about the interpretation of the 10 criteria. There are specific rules that govern how those criteria are supposed to be interpreted, procedural rules about how the district commissions conduct their hearings. Those rules and those guidance documents are what my board creates. So the Land Use Review Board establishes the rules of the road, and the district commissions have their own purview when it comes to reviewing specific applications. The only time where we have a little bit of interplay is when a district commission's decision is appealed. Those appeals currently go to the environmental court, district superior court. And when those decisions are appealed, the district commission steps back because they're the ones that made the decision, and my board steps in and represents them in court and, tries to stand up for those decisions, make settlements where those are necessary, and the like. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Al. Yes, it does. Thank you.
There were a couple of questions in the chat.
First question, if the Grafton Elementary School happens to close, the town owns the building, which is in the village, so Act 250 comes into play. What is the process if the school building becomes something different? How long would that process be?
It would.
Well,
What's that?
require.
It just required a standard Act 250 review. Nothing exceptional, just right out.
So it depends on what, if the school building is not subject to an Act 250 permit currently, I don't know if it is or it isn't, but if it's not, then whatever would be proposed in the school would be judged based on the current jurisdictional thresholds for Act 250. So is it on a parcel? Is it going to be a commercial use? And if so, is it on a parcel of more than an acre? If it is, it would need an Act 250 permit and go through the regular review that we've had for the last, 50 years. Is it going to be a residential development? If it is, and it's more than 10 units, it would require an Act 250 permit. So yeah, it would go through the standard Act 250 review. Nothing particular with regard to this tier 3, which is not subject to that area.
Thank you. And then the second question is, does the Land Use Review Board have boots on the ground in these tier 3 areas? If not, who does?
Good question. So I'll take that in 2 different sort of facets. We do not have boots on the ground with regard to the mapping that we are doing, with the exception of the significant natural communities where Vermont Fish and Wildlife, did map them with boots on the ground. But the headwater stream areas, the habitat connectors, these are being derived from mapping data and are not based on somebody actually walking around saying, yep, this is where there's a good patch of trees and where the critters can cross the road. This is based on remote sensing, which is why the draft rule has a site-specific correction option, so that when that mapping is problematic, a landowner has a hopefully an easy way to say, hey, you missed something here. I don't think my project is actually in a tier 3 area. Here's why. So that's one facet of the boots on the ground question. In terms of, do we have boots on the ground for moving forward? Like, let's say these tier 3 areas are, the rulemaking is completed. We get to December 31st of 2026 and they go into effect. Are we going to have Act 250 staff, boots on the ground, looking at these areas to say, hey, landowner X, you're doing something, you need an Act 250 permit? The answer to that is no. The legislature did not provide us with a much larger team. And so Act 250 permitting and jurisdiction and enforcement will happen the same way it does today, which is largely folks who come into our office to say, I'm doing a project, I want to know if I need a permit, or neighbors who call our office and say, hey, my neighbor's doing this thing, do they need a permit? Is this something that you're aware of? Yeah, that's how a lot of Act 250 works right now.
What is the typical, if there is such a thing, as a typical length of time from application to permit in the Act 250 process? And I guess the distinction is between those minor that only require the administrative review versus the ones that require a hearing. Can you give us like some kind of a ballpark? What are we looking at?
Yeah, that's
6 months, 2 years?
Right. That's a great question. And I should have that on the tip of my tongue and I don't. But so I'll give you my impression from hearing others talk about that. My understanding is that generally minor permits, which again, there's no public hearing, the district commission reviews them, issues an approval, sends it around, says, is everybody good with this, basically? You're talking a few months, 3 to 6 months, depending on the project, how complicated it is. For a major project that's going to go to a public hearing and might have some issues, it could also be 3 to 6 months, but it could be longer depending on just how involved the project is and what level of what issues crop up within the criteria. So I can't really give you a good number for the majors because it really depends on the project, but it can be longer than the 3 to 6 month time horizon.
Thanks.
But we've seen, I mean, with major projects, if all the information is complete and they've done all their background information, they're pretty quick. And the bigger issues is if the information is not complete, or at least, you know, judged by the District Environmental Commission. You can quibble over whether or not just, you know, the judgment by staff and others is correct or not, but I'm just saying it's not, you know, to Alex's point, it really does vary depending on, really, in our experience, because we, you know, used to be a commissioner, I think maybe you served on the project review committee. But you know, it's really the completeness of the application. Are they providing all the information needed for all the relevant criteria? And if they provide, you know, and so even I'll be curious to see, like, you can pay attention right now. You can research on the Act 250 website. The Stratton Mountain master plan update is really tight. In our project review committee, we just like a town, right? When you're invited to participate in a major and review it, and you know, your planning commissioner, select board, or whoever can provide comments. We have that same role. And like our project review committee, which is, you know, really, you know, they adhere to our plan. That's what guides us, is what's in our regional plan. That's what guides our comments. But they actually commended Stratton on having a very complete, thorough master plan, where we've had issues with really big developments, you know, like a ski resort, has been where they really don't have a master plan, or like, you know, it's like this, we're gonna do this little piece over here, we're gonna do this little piece over here, and we're looking at it like, wait a minute, but in aggregate, you're impacting a huge area. So we kind of need to know what your whole plan is. And so that's, and not just us, the district commission, the town would probably do the same thing. And that's where it can drag out.
Yeah.
And
It's
you do
important
have,
to
you
understand
have,
too.
you have the quarry restoration here, which has taken, I think a crazy amount.
And the Grace Cottage project
Yeah.
Yeah,
has languished.
yeah.
It's
They have
important to
gotten
also understand that there are other permits at the state level
their-
that bear on a particular project. And because Act 250 is a comprehensive review from everything from, stormwater impacts to whether you have a good septic system to school impacts, most applicants will rely on these separate state permits to demonstrate compliance with various Act 250 criterion. And so when we say, hey, we have a stormwater criterion, are you going to flood your neighbor's property? Is this going to be, a buttoned up project in the end? Most applicants will, if they require it, will go to the State Agency of Natural Resources and get a stormwater permit first, and then bring that to the Act 250 program and say, here, we comply with your stormwater requirements because we got the state stormwater permit, and the Act 250 District Commission generally gives deference to that. And so oftentimes in the press, you see the horror stories of a large Act 250 project that was controversial, that took a very long time. And much of the time that was required was actually in acquiring those other state agency of natural resource permits at the front end of the process, because they had a stormwater plan that the Agency of Natural Resource said was terrible, and it took them 3 months or 6 months for their engineer to fix it and meet the state standards. Or they had a septic design that the state was like, this doesn't meet our standards. You have to redesign your septic system. And so it's a little bit esoteric, but just know that oftentimes the length is a function of separate A&R permits that factor into Act 250, but are not actually something that the Act 250 program has control over.
And that's all absolutely true. I mean, that's been my experience in our reviews. Oftentimes it's not, Act 250 bears the slings and arrows of the totality of all the permits you have to get. So most people do not distinguish between like the stormwater permit review and the transfer of access permit review and all these other things that you got to get.
Yeah.
It all is considered to be Act 250. But if you actually look at just what's within the purview of the District Environmental Commission, oftentimes that's not where the delays are.
Yeah. But with these new applications that will come into play under Act 181, it obviously can be anticipated that there is going to be a bigger workload, and therefore the district commissions may actually need to add capacity, unless they just want to have the process.
Yeah, and that's hard to say, because honestly, we just, in these areas, you're not seeing a lot of development anyway.
Well.
It's a good question, though. It's a good question that we don't have a good answer for. And just to be clear about it, there's going to be some balancing and offsetting. So Grafton does not have zoning, right? So your village center is not going to be eligible for Act 250 exemptions. But in other communities that do have zoning and subdivision regs that will be eligible, we're going to see less Act 250 permitting in those areas. And guess what? Those are the areas that see the most development and see the most Act 250 permit activity. So we're going to see less permitting activity on one side. And you're right, we are going to see more in these tier 3 areas, and we're just not sure what that balance is going to be yet. And so part of my job and my board's job over the next few years is to keep really good track of that, and to be able to go to the legislature, a year or 2 or 3 out and say, here's what we're seeing. Maybe we need more resources, to make sure that the processing time is reasonable and that the system is not overwhelmed. But we're sort of stepping into it without knowing exactly what that balance is going to look like.
Suzanne,
Thank you. This discussion is just great. Stepping back and thinking about the totality of our conversation tonight, the need that I feel the most is a process for providing public comment on the tier system. I have confidence because we've experienced it before with the Wyndham Regional Commission, that their process for collaboration is clear. The meetings are set, the agenda is there, the notice is there, et cetera, et cetera. Alex, with all due respect, I did not get that sense of organization and process on the rural public comment side. And I think people in Grafton, we're kind of the hardcore that stuck it out here tonight, but we're very, very grateful for this information. This is wonderful, and thank you so much. But I would like to see from the review board, a plan for how this information is gonna be collected from localities such as Grafton. And in order to meet those deadlines for public comment.
Hear you. And we'll strive to do better. We'll strive to do more. I don't think that I can commit to showing up in every single select board or planning commission across the state to make sure everybody has the information on their own sort of time horizon but I'm happy to do as much as I can. And if you look at our tier 3 website, you'll see the time horizon laid out and what the schedule looks like with the various drafts and iterations. But I take your point. Yep, more clarity on what the process is and how people can contribute would be good.
And like anything else, I think it's also up to our town to be proactive and to reach out to you and to others and make sure that Grafton is heard.
And I would just note too, please feel free to contact us at Wyndham Regional, like use us as a resource too. I'm very grateful that Alex was able to join us tonight. Just because we have some knowledge about tier 3 and the rulemaking process, but Alex is the one that's really spearheading this process. So we're definitely a resource to that you can come to, and we can provide information as best as we can, or also direct you to the Land Use Review Board if we're not able to answer questions. But we have several planners on staff that can assist Grafton if you have questions, and Alex is one individual that's serving the whole state. So so feel free to contact us as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just noting that we will probably, there'll be a lot of caveats, like, you know, you'll be a lot of like, it is our understanding,
Yeah.
where they're at in the process is this, and what we were told is this, and
Yeah.
but so ultimately, Alex is your definitive source, but we can tell you as best we understand the situation.
Well, yeah, well, you're many steps ahead of us here, so.
Yeah.
So thanks, Chris, and that, yeah.
Do you feel like this is the initial sort of opening conversation? I'll be honest with you, we held 4 public engagement sessions around the state at the end of October, from Newport to Windsor to EGADS, I've forgotten the others. Anyways, Morrisville, we were in 4 different locations across the state, and I had hoped naively that some of the feedback would be, hey, I looked at your rule and I think this section here, like you could change that. We got none of that, right? At those opening meetings, everything we got was questions. Like, I don't understand. What does this mean? Why is it important? What is the problem this is trying to solve? That was one of my favorite questions from the Newport session. Was somebody said, what was the legislature thinking? Like, what was the problem they were trying to fix with this? And so I really feel like this initial effort that we're doing and what we're doing tonight is just about sort of getting the word out. And I'm hopeful that in late winter, February, March, we will do a better job of getting information out, and we'll start to get substantive comments about fix this, this isn't fair, add this, those sorts of things. But at this point, I'm really grateful that all of you are here, that you can spread the word about the fact that Act 250 is expanding and it's significant, and that people need to be aware of that, and they need to start looking at the information and asking questions.
And that's what I was explaining before. So I would encourage everybody to go look at the 5-page rule. And really that,
Yeah.
what we're gonna have the most impact is commenting on that, because things like, I mean, it's great to suggest, and it sounds like Alex is on board, like partnering with whoever to figure out how to get word out to landowners, because not only because, I mean, I know some of the questions come from like a property valuation standpoint, but also just, it's just good practice to say, hey, you're now gonna be required to have a permit. You didn't used to before.
Yeah.
But where it's really critical, this is like, so I used to work with farmers and all, it'd be like, we would say, here is a new rule that's being promulgated, like how the wildlife habitat incentive program is working, or this commodity program. You need to look, read through this and think about what does that mean for you being able to qualify for that program. I mean, again, this is a different thing, but that's really where we needed to get the communication going between the rule maker and the people who are going to be impacted by the rule.
Yeah.
To ensure that, that it goes as smoothly as possible with no unintended or minimizing the potential for unintended consequences. And I think, the fantastic thing I think about Alex being in this position is he's been doing this at a municipal scale for decades. And so now this is really just, it's a statewide level. So he's used to engaging in these kinds of questions. And he's, I think they want to be good stewards of this process and want to make sure it's as efficacious as possible for everybody involved. So if you can find the time, now that you've heard kind of this introduction, go and read in depth that 5-page rule and see, and what I would encourage you to is not only what needs to change, but also what needs to stay. Because cause you might want to commend them, you might want to think about commending them for like intentionally realizing what the impacts were going to be and really winnowing it down from what it originally was. Because I'm not saying that this is going to be the case, but again, hypothetically, if you like that, you should probably comment on that, because there may be also pushback from other commenters saying, no, go back to the 60% to 90%.
Yeah.
So that's all to say. It's easy to focus on what you don't like, but it's also really important to say what you do like.
Keep that in, yeah.
So so this has been a great conversation. I need to blow your mind a little bit, and I've been waiting to talk about this other facet of the Act 250 expansion. So if there's more questions about Tier 3, I'm happy to take them, but I need to show you the road construction jurisdictional change that's happening, because it's probably bigger than the Tier 3 expansion. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think my question is focused on Tier 3, so if you want to go ahead, go.
Okay. Alex, go right ahead.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop the sharing of my contact information, and I'm going to share a different screen back to the map. Okay. Can you see Grafton on the map?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so same Tier 3 areas we were looking at before, same village center that's sort of going to, be sacrosanct and excluded from Tier 3. These are the sort of spotty areas in which, because they're critical resource areas, most development would require an Act 250 permit, even if it was small, right? So I'm going to turn those off for just a moment. So we're back to just Grafton. And now I'm going to show you the area that potentially could require an Act 250 permit if it involves a new road of more than 800 feet. So this is a map with the roads buffered out by 800 feet, and everything in gray is more than 800 feet away from an existing road. And the assumption is that in order to do development in those areas, you're going to need to build a road to get there. And everything in gray is far enough away that you're going to be over an 800-foot road, meaning you're going to need an Act 250 permit. This new provision is a much larger expansion of Act 250 jurisdiction than the more targeted Tier 3 areas that we spent most of tonight talking about. And this is a provision that my board has no control over. This was part of Act 181 that the legislature implemented, and It will happen. My board doesn't get a chance to like write rules to like change it substantially. And the time horizon for this change is actually sooner. It's July 1st of next year. So this is a big deal. And in most of the public meetings that we've had, when people ask this question, I tell them this is probably a bigger deal than the tier 3 areas just by the amount of land area of the state that is going to be subject to an Act 250 permit. Many of these areas are never going to be developed or not for a very long time because they're far away from a road, they're interior forest areas. But some of them will, and they will require an Act 250 permit. So I didn't want to hide that from you, even though my board is not, the driving force behind this. This was the legislature. There used to be a rule like this in the Act 250 law 20 years ago. There was a road rule that was similar to this new version of it, but we haven't had it for 20 years, and now it's back. And so, again, full disclosure, this is another aspect of the reform effort that will expand Act 250 jurisdiction in these areas, more than 800 feet away from existing roads.
And Alex, there's nothing special about that, right? It's just, if you're in that gray area, Act 250 applies, right? It's not a special Act 250 or anything, it's just.
It's the same Act 250,
right?
Same process, but it's any development, right? So
right.
There's, unlike tier 3 where we're trying to tailor the exemptions, if you're building more than 800 feet of road, you need an Act 250 permit, and any development associated with that is along for the ride with that Act 250 permit, with a couple of exceptions. Agriculture and forestry will still remain exempt, even if there's a new forest logging road that's built that's 1,000 feet long to get to a place to do forestry. Those land uses will continue to be exempt from Act 250, but you want to build a camp, you want to build a new house, you want to build a barn, something that's not ag or forest related, and you're doing it at the end of a very long road, will now require an Act 250 permit, at least as of July 1st, if that road goes in after July 1st of next year.
Alex, I have a question. I'm Steve Fisher. I'm a landowner, Grafton. I have a portion of land that I have a right of way across a neighboring property. And for me to put a road into my land is probably gonna be pushing that 800 feet. Does that apply, or is it just on town roads?
Good question. It's any new road construction. So yes, it would apply if you built more.
Even if it's, my cousin owns the land next door and I can come off his road, it's a private road. It's Farm Country Lane, there's 1, 2, 3 residents up there. And I would be building a road off from that road to my property.
Yeah.
So
still apply to that. If the road that you built was more than 800 feet, it wouldn't matter. The existing road was existing. That's fine. No jurisdiction trigger there.
From the town road, it's Fisher Hill, actually.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. It's just amount of the length of the road.
Correct. Yep. That's
Okay.
The way the statute is written. And you should be asking yourself the really great question I got in Newport, which is, what is the problem that the legislature was trying to solve with this new road rule? And the problem that they identified was the sort of slow death by 1,000 cuts of interior forest across the state through smaller projects that were sort of sub-jurisdictional, didn't require an Act 250 permit. And that's what they were attempting to address, is by saying, if you're going to punch a road into deep forest, we want you to go through a design process and a review process to make sure that deep forest doesn't eventually all get carved up with long driveways and houses at the end of them.
And we don't need to I'm not gonna pull us into a whole conversation about this, but I just wanna use an example, an area where I used to live. So I grew up in southwestern Virginia, a little town called Abingdon. A lot of people know Bristol, which is nearby, which is where, racetrack is. NASCAR. But I'm also, we're just right on the border with North Carolina, Northeast Tennessee, Southeast Kentucky, areas that have been subjected to even worse flooding than we've had. And you take a link. Well, if you've ever been to the mountains of North Carolina, like around Boone, Blowing Rock, those areas. So what happened during Helene? They had lots of roads cut into those, lots of homes had massive landslides. And North Carolina tried to get a handle on that, but then they backed away from it. And it is absolutely clear that the presence of all those roads, they really changed the dynamic. And right there, at least we kind of had these glacial soils. So some of our mountains are really just like piles of, they perk a little bit. Whereas up there, right, it's clay soils on hard rock and they just would slide. And so that's not what this road rule is getting at, but that is the potential continue, what happens if you have the death by 1,000 cuts, as you wind up, it's not just right, it's not just the forest fragmentation, which also impacts the wood processing industry and the forestry industry and other things. Ultimately, it can really change the hydrology of an area. It can exacerbate flood, landslide risk and other things. They're not getting into that, but that is, but like that, other parts of the country have experienced that death by 1,000 cuts, and it's kind of, once that genie's out of the bottle, it's out. So all that's going to happen to you now potentially. I'm not minimizing it, but you're going to have to apply for a permit.
Right.
It's not saying you can't build there. It means you're going to have to.
Right.
It'll probably be an administrative. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or something that you want to go through, but it's not. Whereas when I worked in Calvert County, Maryland, with really restrictive development, there were a lot of areas where you could not build anything, and this is not that. Didn't mean to go too deep into that, but the problem they're concerned with is other places have seen it, even places right in New England. I mean, we've seen this. So.
Well, we've seen it here in Vermont too, Chris, and because I don't live and recreate in southern Vermont, I can't give you a good example from down there. The example that I use up here in northern Vermont, or at least central northern Vermont, is Stowe. So most people are familiar with Stowe because of the ski area, and with Waterbury Center next door. Ben and Jerry's is there and all the tourist stuff. Anyways, I like to go hiking. I like to go hiking on Mount Hunger, which is in the Worcester Mountain Range, sort of in the Stowe Waterbury area. And from the top of Mount Hunger, you can look west towards Stowe and Mount Mansfield. And over the decades, the amount of multi-million-dollar homes built at the end of long driveways, fragmenting the landscape in that area is remarkable. And very few of those projects had to go through any Act 250 review because they were single homes at the end of very long driveways. And so that's the example I tend to give to people. Not very helpful for folks in Grafton because you may not even be familiar with that area, but that's the kind of thing you can actually see it on the landscape, sort of these little holes that are cropping up across the forest throughout sort of interior forest areas over time.
Well, and the closer example, and at least I don't think we were commissioner doing this, we're doing our 50th anniversary celebration. Act 250 was born in our region because Governor Dean Davis was exploring the Deerfield Valley. And there's Haystack Mountain, he saw these half-acre lots, but he's like, all these septic and well, he's like, but his perspective was that's not good for the Vermont brand. Like that is not what people are investing their money in and building resorts for that. And so we work with Act 250 was actually piloted here. So if you ever just have a lot of time on your hands and want to explore, we have videos about interviews with folks who were around during all that process. But yeah, so Act 250 was born from that kind of death by 1,000 cuts fear. But again, it wasn't so much about preserving the integrity of habitat blocks and habitat connectors and forest blocks. It was, we're about to trash the Vermont. We're not living up to the white Christmas standard of Bing Crosby.
Okay. Are we done yet?
Yeah, this is great.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.